we don't understand the law. Law for the People with Eric Cedillo is here to inform, educate, and answer your legal questions. Thank you for tuning in today. From the law offices of Eric Cedillo, located at 1725 Greenville Avenue in Dallas, Texas, here's your host, Eric Cedillo.
Thank you so much for rejoining us here on Law for the People. You know, Fern, we actually have offices in Irving and San Antonio as well, so I just
that's right.
Throw out that plug as we're kind of sitting here. We have a wonderful second guest with us today. Her name is Victoria Neave, and she is running for state rep in the 107th. And Victoria, why don't we just start off and let everybody know, what is a state rep? What does a state rep do? And then we'll kind of take it from there.
Absolutely. And I want to thank you so much for inviting me to be on your show and to talk about the issues. It's an exciting election year, and so this is perfect timing. My name is Victoria Neave. I'm an attorney, candidate for state representative for House District 107, and our district covers parts of Mesquite, parts of Garland, and parts of East Dallas by Lakewood, Lockwood, and other areas near Casa View by 635.
Okay.
And so what a state rep does is represent your district in the state legislature in Austin on odd-numbered years.
Yeah.
And state legislators pass laws dealing with the budget and just laws that affect us on a daily basis. So it's everything from funding of our public schools to investment in our infrastructure like highways, to funding of CPS agencies, state agencies like the Texas Department of Public Safety, among other things. So it's like passing budgets and bills, even dealing with the family code, the penal code, just laws that affect all of Texas.
Yeah, and I don't think people really realize how the effect that the Texas state legislature has on their everyday lives, probably much more so than any other governing body, including the federal government, including municipal governments and things of that nature. So an incredibly part of the whole rubric of how things work. And you're running for the 107th, and you mentioned the areas. That's one of my area. I'm in that district, so I'm looking very forward to being able to cast a ballot for you.
Great, thank you.
And we'll kind of take it from there. Before we get into a little bit about the policies, 'cause I'd really like to get a sense of what it is you're running for, what your platform's all about. And you've been on the show before, so fortunately I think I have a little sense of it. But for people who are listening in, we really want to get into that. But before we do, let's talk a little bit about you. Let's talk about, because in this show we have a few minutes. We got a good 50 minutes to an hour to talk about our guests. And I'd really like to give them a sense of who you are. So let's talk about you and where you were born and where you kind of grew up and all that good stuff.
Absolutely. So I grew up in Pleasant Grove in the Barrio part, a low-income neighborhood just on the south side of 175. And my dad came here many years ago as an immigrant from a small town in Mexico, a little town called Zapotlanejo. And I like to tell folks that he came to this country with two things, because to me it's very powerful. He came with a sixth grade education, which is not unlike many individuals living in our state and in our country. But he also came with a dream, and his dream was a dream for a better life. And there are millions of families in situations or that have similar backgrounds as I have, that have come here looking for a better life. And my parents, and he's proud to be a citizen now, proud Texan, and so he and my mom emphasized to me the importance of education. But and even though he had a sixth grade education, he learned a trade, and that was repairing TVs and VCRs. This was way back when people actually used to repair them. And so his first TV shop was in Mesquite. And so I spent so much time there, and I loved it. It was right off of Galloway in Town East. And then that's why, and small business is also a part of our platform, like helping small businesses grow, because they're good, really true job creators. His business eventually expanded, and then he had one in Garland off of 30 by Lake Ray Hubbard, one in right in East Dallas by Buckner and Garland Road, and one in Pleasant Grove, and some like at little bazaars here and there. That's
business was booming in the 80s
back
when they were repairing televisions.
Yeah, people actually used to get it repaired. prepared.
Yeah.
And then after a while, and warranties would cover it. And then, after a while, it was
new
less
technologies
expensive.
every
Yeah.
6 months, and it's better just to replace it kind of thing.
Yes.
So how long did he have that business? Was that...
He had it, and it was over a dozen years. It
Okay.
was in the 80s and the 90s, I remember back then.
Okay.
And, so.
And when he came, you mentioned he was an immigrant from Mexico. What did he do there, or was he a child when he came over? How old was he when he came over?
He came when he was in his teens. He was like
Okay.
19 or 20, and then he met my mom in church, in Catholic church, and
Here
they
in,
got married here in Dallas.
In Dallas, okay.
And they
Okay.
got married, and all of my family actually still lives in that same neighborhood. A lot of my family does in the barrio. My grandpa lives there, my madrina, mom,
Okay.
tios, and tias.
Now, were the first ones to come to Dallas from Mexico, or were they?
My dad was.
predecessors?
My mom was born here,
Okay.
and so she was born
Okay.
and raised in Dallas. She went to Spruce High School,
Okay.
and so.
Spruce, we were just there the other day,
Oh,
doing some
yeah, okay.
voting,
Oh, great.
getting some kids to register to vote. Okay, so brothers and sisters, do you have any brothers and sisters?
Yes, so I have a younger brother. He's 5 years younger than me. He
Okay.
works for me at my law firm. He's
Okay.
a paralegal, and then I have two stepbrothers with my dad, and they're really adorable.
Okay. Your law firm, you're working as an attorney, of course, and tell us a little bit about what that's all about and how long you've been practicing and all those good things.
Sure. So I've been practicing. So I'm 35 now. I graduated law school in 2009, so about 7 years or so,
Okay.
if my math is right. And before I started my own practice, I worked for actually one of the top 10 law firms in the country. And I will tell you, it was completely, and this is why education is also a big part of our campaign, because to me it was sort of this girl coming from the barrio to work at one of the top 10 firms. I had a chance to work on multi-billion-dollar complex litigation
Yeah.
with just everything dealing from like antitrust to securities law. Like, it just really opened up my eyes. And
Right.
and I learned so much from amazing partners and attorneys there.
Yeah.
But I started my own firm, and I represent individuals and small businesses in civil litigation and employment law.
Okay. Where'd you go to school? Where'd you go to law school?
So I went to Texas Southern Thurgood Marshall School of Law in Houston,
Okay.
and then came back over here. And then
And how about before that?
before
Undergrad?
that, UT Dallas in
UT
Richardson
Dallas.
is where I graduated from. I had a degree in government and politics, so I've had an interest in our government since I was very, very young, and got
Yeah,
involved in
yeah.
civil rights advocacy. And so since I was way back in high school.
Did you go from high school directly into college?
I did. And then I also took courses at community college, and then also took 2 years off to work.
Okay.
And so
Yeah, that's the transition, quite honestly, from folks who maybe never completed high school to having children who become lawyers. An amazing one in such a short stretch. Where do you think that kind of came from? You mentioned your parents, the stressing education and other things. Tell us a little bit about that. How did they kind of prompt you into gaining an education and ultimately becoming a lawyer? Was that something that they kind of said, hey, I want you to be a lawyer?
Yeah, they didn't tell me I want you to be a lawyer, but they told me, make sure that you get a good education. You focus on your school first, and that you don't forget where you came from, and that you serve the community, and that, God's golden rule of treat people right, treat people with compassion. And so the way that I wanted to give back was I wanted to learn the law, because I would hear about issues in the community all the time, and I always thought, well, the question that somebody always raised was, what does the law say about this, or what does it say about that? So I thought, you know what, I want to go to law school. I want to learn what the law is, so that I can use it to help our community, and then eventually write legislation that that impacts our community.
Right. When do you think that kind of hit you? When did that, hey, I want to be a lawyer, that kind of hearing the questions to actually saying, hey, I want to be a lawyer?
When I was very young.
Okay.
And at first I thought I wanted to go to medical school because I was really good at math and science, but I just really... just getting involved in civil rights advocacy, it had been with me. And so, I knew that was eventually going to be the field that I wanted to get into.
Well, let's talk about this campaign that you're kind of going through. When did you kind of get the idea that you were going to run for state rep?
So I've known that I wanted to serve in some capacity. I wanted to make sure that I was ready in my career to be able to devote and give of myself completely to this. And so then when I started seeing laws come out of our state legislature that just were hurting our community, were not helping us, and when I saw, our community was being ignored, and the legislature and our opponent were focusing on issues that weren't relevant to the real needs of working families in our community, I thought that I've had enough. Like, it's time to step up. And so that's when I decided to run.
Okay. Had you ever contemplated a run in some other capacity, or was this kind of, hey, this is the one that I'm gonna go for?
I had been approached to run for like city council and things like that. And for me, one, I didn't feel that I was ready in my career at that time, and I wanted to learn more about the law. And then at the same time, that wasn't my calling. Like, for me, it was, I wanted to serve our community in a way that impacted as many people as possible. Okay. And as a state legislator, we represent our district, but the laws that we will write, if I'm so fortunate enough to be elected, affect everybody in Texas. And so,
well, let's talk about that, sure. Victoria, in terms of maybe people getting a clearer understanding or idea of what the Texas legislature currently looks like. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not running for office, so I don't really have to kind of dance around too many issues. But in all honesty, it is, for me, in my personal opinion, it's a travesty as to what's going on. In all honesty, the conversion of the governor from, the kind of the takeover of the Tea Party in terms of what they've done and move things around wasn't so bad prior to what he's become. But our lieutenant governor and some of the things that I've heard coming from his mouth, incredibly scary, and unfortunately, it comes from the top, and you see it, in terms of some of the crazy vitriolic things that Donald Trump is espousing currently, and it's really incredibly scary, quite honestly. I was talking to Hector Garza earlier, our guest from earlier, about transitions, and I've been practicing for about 20 years, and like I said, back in the late 90s, when I'd come from San Antonio back to Dallas, I felt really good. I felt really good about it because, in the 70s and 80s, it wasn't always a real welcoming place, in all honesty, to be a Latino. But then we started transitioning, and I started feeling a little bit better, and we were the backbone, and we were this, and we were all that. And then all of a sudden, the whole landscape changed. And, the Republican Party tried to hang on, I think, to what it was doing. And you see the creation of the Tea Party. You see this anti-immigrant sentiment being espoused and other things. So in all honesty, for me, in terms of what the current Texas legislature looks like, is a very scary thing. You talked about public education. If you would, just kind of expound upon that a little bit in terms of what's happened over the last few years. We mentioned earlier that 50% of our students in Texas schools are Latino currently. All of the state of Texas, 72, 73% in DISD. So when we talk about public education, we're really talking about Latinos and Latino issues. So talk a little bit about that in terms of defunding, just some things that are going on right now.
Absolutely, and education is a big issue. And before I talk about that, I want to, so as you're talking about, so I'm the Democratic candidate, and I'm very proud to be the Democratic candidate. I'm also a bridge builder, and I'm very proud that, and we've been working very, very hard to, earn the votes of everybody in our community. So I'm very proud that we have lots of independent and Republican supporters as well who are backing our campaign, who are sort of fed up with how the direction that their party is going, or very fed up with the inaction of the incumbent, our opponent. And so for me, it's about, I want to represent everybody. I would like to earn the votes of everybody in our district. And so, I think that it's time that we get away from that one-sided politics and start working together, because that's how we work together, we can move forward an agenda that benefits everybody in our community, instead of looking at it just so one-sided, so partisan. And so it's just that's a big reason why it's time for change. And I'm going to continue to work hard to make sure that we earn the votes of everybody regardless of party. On education, this is a big issue in our campaign. I'm a big believer that we've got to invest in our public schools, that we've got to take care of our teachers who are paid lower than the national average. our opponent cut more than $5.4 billion. His name is Ken Sheets. He voted and cut more than $5.4 billion from our public schools a few years back in the state legislature, and they have failed to fully restore the funds. And in the meantime, thousands of teachers were laid off across the state. Our class sizes have gotten bigger. The population of the students continues to grow. And since he's been elected, we've gone through 6 years of seniors that have graduated without all the tools that they need. In Texas, our kids deserve the absolute best. I will fight because I believe that we need to invest in our schools. I'm talking to teachers all the time. I talk to retired teachers. Some of the things that they are telling me, and even parents are telling me, that they have concerns with high stakes testing, and kids are getting physically ill because they're so concerned that they're going to fail, they're not going to be able to graduate because there's so many tests and teachers are having to teach to the test. There are also, and Dallas Morning News did an article on this recently, teachers are having to work 2 jobs just to make ends meet. Yeah. And that's unacceptable. They've sacrificed, they're serving, they're taking care of our kids and teaching them. And then they're still paying out of pocket for supplies for low-income students. Right. And that's because our state has failed. Our state has failed to invest the funding, and we have the funding. So when we hear excuses that, we don't have the funds for our public schools, that's not the case. It's a matter of priorities of our state legislature and priorities of the incumbent, and that's why we're fighting back, because it should be about us, it should be about the people, it should be about our kids. And I'm a fighter, as you can ask, folks who know me, that is something that we've got to fight back against because our kids deserve the best.
Yeah, we're going to maintain billions of dollars in our rainy day fund, but we don't have money to devote towards education. Mm-hmm. It's kind of what we're continuously hearing. I have been incredibly fearful of quite honestly, some of the things that come from, the governor's office and lieutenant governor, in terms of the ways in which they bash public education, maintaining that it's godless, that it's this and it's that, and quite honestly, based on the numbers that we're talking about, and for me, it truly is, and I'm sure, and maybe to you, it is a Latino issue, of course, because of the numbers that we have, but also it's what's good for the state of Texas, what's good for our country. Undereducating our children is going to have an incredible impact. You talk about reaching across the aisle and dealing with Republicans.
Yeah, it affects everybody.
Talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Our whole community, our country, our state will benefit if we have an educated populace. And we hear it from the business community, and sitting with chambers. I've led a chamber of commerce. They want our students to have the best education, be college ready, or be ready to get into, technical trades, and have all the tools that they need. And that's why college affordability is another big issue in our campaign. The Speaker of the House, the governor, and the lieutenant governor want to cut and have asked all the public colleges and the community colleges in the state to cut their budgets by 4% in this upcoming legislative session. So that's another battle that we're going to have. And so if they cut those budgets, we know that a consequence of that is that tuition is going to go up and or services are going to be cut. And that directly impacts students, that directly impacts parents and families who are struggling just to make sure that their kids go to college. We should be making college more affordable, not more expensive. And they want to cut $345 million in tuition set-asides for low-income and middle-income students. And that, to me, is unacceptable. Our opponent marches to the beat of his bosses in Austin. I'm a big believer that it's about us. We need to be fighting for education. And I know that's going to be a battle. We already know it's going to be a battle in the upcoming legislative session. Yeah.
I want to talk more policy a little bit, and we'll talk about some of the different topics that we want to cover. Before we get to that, if we could, Victoria, I'd really like to discuss. We know that the state of Texas is what most people would kind of consider, Republican and red in terms of the legislature. That's changing, I think, in a lot of ways, specifically with respect to this race. People who have heard your name, know that you're a Democrat, kind of running. Talk to us a little bit about the real possibility of you actually winning this district, because it's a kind of a hodgepodge district in terms of what it looks like and who it covers. Tell us a little bit about whether or not you can actually win this thing. I know you wouldn't be doing it unless you could, but tell us how that kind of looks.
Absolutely. We absolutely can win this and working hard to do this. During the last presidential election 4 years ago, the Republican incumbent Ken Sheets won by a very, very narrow margin. So it was 50.8 to 49.2%.
Yeah.
50.8 to 49.2%.
Do we know what the actual numbers translate to? Do we know what
Yes, it was a 50,000 vote turnout. So
Okay.
he had 25,900 and something, and the Democratic candidate had 25,000 and like 18.
Oh, wow.
So it was an 850 vote margin
Wow.
out of 50,000 votes, and that's tremendous. When you break it down by precinct, it's a very low number of just a few extra votes per precinct. The Democratic candidate at that time would have won, and so we know that it's winnable. We're working hard, and again, when I talk about sort of Democrat versus Republican, for me, it's about representing everybody. I really am proud that we've been able to earn the votes of Republicans and independents and and Democrats in our district. And so it's going to be a close election. We know it is, but that's why we're out there working very hard to earn the votes of our community.
Yeah. Once again, before we take a break, let's break down who is actually, what ballots you're going to be on and where those kind of cover and what they should be looking for.
Absolutely. So if you or anybody you know that lives in, we have part of Mesquite, part of South Garland along 635, and then we have part of East Dallas and part of Lakewood. And so it's a very gerrymandered district, but whenever you go vote for president, if you live in House District 107, once you keep going down the ballot, if you don't vote straight ticket, you can vote straight Democrat, and it'll automatically catch us in there.
I'd encourage you to do that, but go ahead.
Thank you. If you don't vote straight ticket and you go one by one, after you vote for president and you lower down the ballot, you'll see state representative, and you'll see my name, Victoria Neave, and our opponent, Ken Sheets. And I would be honored if you would check our name and Victoria.
Okay.
And
you'd mentioned a little bit, and we'll just discuss it a little bit. You'd mentioned some support from Republicans. I know and there's been a tremendous break in the Republican Party at the on the biggest stage with respect to support for Trump and really non-support for Trump among Republicans. Tell us a little bit about that in terms of specifically support for you and kind of what the dynamic is in the state legislature.
Absolutely. It's everything, everybody from local voters at the doors that I'm talking to, conversations to somebody who led the Hispanic Republican National Assembly for the Republican National Committee. National representative is backing our campaign. Just I think the other day I think it was yesterday, a voter posted on our Facebook that he's never heard of our opponent, and for the first time ever, he's the super, super conservative Republican. He said for the first time ever, he's going to be voting for a Democratic candidate, and he's going to be supporting our campaign. And he said the reason is because he's seen me in the community working late at night, and it was actually right after. So I want to thank you, Devin, for that comment, because it was very kind, and I really appreciate it. Like when folks tell me that, it really means a lot to me and our team, because we're making a connection. It was right after the tornadoes hit that came through part of Garland, and one of the families in our district had reached out. Their apartments were blown out, and so were destroyed, and so they didn't have anything. And so there's an organization which is amazing in Mesquite called Sharing Life, and so they opened the doors for us, and we took the family. There were other volunteers that came and brought food, and it was very cold at the time. They didn't even have jackets. So Sharing Life was, just so generous and gave them jackets and, food and just lots of things in their time of need. And so the Republican voter that posted that said the reason that he's backing our campaign is because of the work that he's seen me do. And we didn't post any of that stuff on Facebook or anything for me, because it's about service. It's about, especially when nobody's looking, it's about serving our community, not protecting big corporate interests like our opponent is.
Yeah.
And he's an insurance defense attorney. His clients are big insurance, so the bills that he tries to pass are protecting big insurance to the detriment of homeowners and consumers in our community. And so as an attorney, I've represented multinational corporations at the firm that I was at. I represent lots of small businesses. I've led a chamber of commerce. I represent lots of individuals. And for me, we need to have a balanced approach, not anti-insurance. We need insurance, but in my view, we should have a balanced approach, not just somebody who's going to be, because like our opponent has received more than $200,000 in campaign donations from big insurance. He's known as being insurance's guy in Austin, is just passing those types of bills to the detriment of homeowners. So I want to fight for us, for our community, for the people, and also, make sure that we just have a balanced approach and reach across the aisle to work with folks.
I think that's an important point with respect to insurance and who's running, and I'd really like to get into that a little bit more when we come back from the break. Before we do, I got to say, Victoria, that you're probably the hardest working person that I've ever seen on the campaign trail.
Thank you.
Definitely locally, and what I've seen, been around for a little while.
Thank you.
And you're going to win, and it's because of the amount of work that you do, and really the bringing together of folks to kind of help you. They see it and they see what's going on. But we'll come back in about 2 minutes and talk a little bit more about the policies and what makes you the better candidate in this election.
Great.
Okay, so
Thank
you guys
you.
rejoin us in about 2 minutes. Thank you so much for joining us here at Law for the People.